Let me tell you something right off the bat. I've been through a lot of shit in my life, but I never thought a bunch of suburban busybodies could piss me off more than the assholes I dealt with back in my prime. Oh, where are my manners? My name's Malcolm. Early 40s, single. Dog dad to the best damn golden retriever, Max. And for the record, I moved to this neighborhood for peace and quiet, not for the HOA's dictatorship. You see, this place looked perfect at first. Cute little houses, everyone smiling at you like they actually care about your day, and not a speck of trash in sight. But let me tell you, that squeaky clean image, it's faker than a politician's promises. These folks have more skeletons in their closets than a Halloween store. I was about to find out the hard way. It all started with my garden. I know, thrilling, right? I put up a beautiful iron trellis, something classy, something that wouldn't make me feel like I was living in one of those cookie-cutter catalog neighborhoods. Apparently, though, my personal touch wasn't in line with the community's aesthetic guidelines. Yeah, someone actually had the audacity to leave that note on my porch. Signed it, the HOA. No name, no face, just the HOA. Like they were some secret society hell-bent on preserving mediocrity. At first, I laughed it off. I mean, who gets mad over a damn trellis? But then the letters kept coming. Remove the structure immediately. This is your second warning. And my personal favorite? Failure to comply will result in penalties. Penalties? Seriously? What are they going to do? Take away my right to exist in their Stepford Wives fantasy land? Give me a break. Now, let me tell you about these people. There's Mrs. Carter, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. You know the type, mid-60s, hair sprayed to high heaven, and always clutching her little clipboard like it's a badge of honor. She came knocking one day with that tight-lipped smile that screamed, "I'm about to ruin your day, and I'll enjoy every second of it." "Mr. Malcolm," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "I'm sure you understand how important it is for us to maintain a certain standard here." I raised an eyebrow. "Sure, and I'm sure you understand that it's my property." Her smile faltered for a second, just a second. But oh, it was glorious. "Well," she continued, recovering like the professional buzzkill she was, "we all agreed to these rules when we moved in. I trust you'll do the right thing." I shrugged. "I always do the right thing. Thanks for stopping by." And with that, I shut the door. Politely, of course. Now here's where things got weird. A few nights later, I was out walking Max. Quiet night, stars out, just me and my boy. We passed by Mrs. Carter's house, and I swear I saw her peeking through the blinds like she was some sort of low-budget private investigator. I waved just to mess with her, and damn if she didn't yank those blinds shut so fast I thought she'd break them. The next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with pamphlets on HOA guidelines and conflict resolution. Yeah, because nothing screams conflict resolution like passive-aggressive notes and unsolicited advice. I thought that was the end of it. But no, these people were just getting started. A few days later, I came home to find my trash cans tipped over, my sprinklers mysteriously turned on full blast, and, get this, a fine taped to my door for unauthorized lawn maintenance. Lawn maintenance? My grass was pristine. Hell, it was better than pristine. It was a damn masterpiece. Meanwhile, the guy 3 houses down hadn't mowed his lawn in weeks, but sure, let's pick on me. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about a trellis or a lawn. No, this was personal. Someone had decided I didn't belong, and they were going to make damn sure I felt it. I poured myself a glass of bourbon that night and sat on my porch, watching the neighborhood lights go out one by one. Max lay at my feet, tail wagging as if to say, "Screw 'em, Dad. You're better than this." And you know what? He was right. But something told me this was only the beginning, and if they thought I was just going to roll over and take it, well, they clearly didn't know me. Stay tuned. Because when Malcolm fights back, it's never boring. I woke up the next morning to a delightful surprise. Someone, or rather someones, had taken it upon themselves to decorate my front yard. Toilet paper hung from the trees like some middle school prank gone corporate. My mailbox? Oh, it was stuffed with, wait for it, more HOA pamphlets. Only this time, someone had scrawled across the front, "Not welcome here." Charming, right? As I cleaned up the mess, I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you let out when you're 2 seconds away from losing your mind. Max trotted over, wagging his tail and looking at me like, "Dad, is this a new game? Are we playing fetch with the trash now?" But the kicker, Mrs. Carter was standing on her porch, sipping her coffee like she was watching the damn Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. She didn't even try to hide her smug grin. I waved at her with the biggest, fakest smile I could muster. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. Love what you've done with the place." She didn't respond, just turned on her heel and went back inside. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a passive-aggressive suburban feud. This was war. Later that day, I decided to pay a visit to the HOA office, or as I like to call it, the Circle of Doom. The building was a bland little structure at the edge of town, where dreams of individuality went to die. I walked in and was greeted by the receptionist, a chipper young woman who looked like she had been trapped in this job by a really bad life decision. "Hi, I'm Malcolm," I said, leaning on the counter. "I live on Elmwood, you know, the guy with the unauthorized trellis." Her smile faltered for a second before she caught herself. "Oh yes, Mr. Malcolm, how can I help you?" "Well," I said, pulling out my phone, "I was hoping you could explain why my property is apparently the HOA's favorite target. And while we're at it, maybe you can tell me who thought it was a good idea to vandalize my yard. You know, since you're all about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood." Her eyes widened. I don't think we're authorized to discuss my... I cut her off. "Great, then get me someone who is authorized." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Gary. Now, Gary was the HOA president, and he looked every bit the part. Balding, wearing a polo shirt with the HOA logo stitched on it, and sweating like he'd just run a marathon. He gave me the kind of smile that said, "I hate you, but I have to pretend I don't." "Mr. Malcolm," he began, we've received several complaints about your property." "Save it, Gary," I interrupted. "I'm not here for your scripted bullshit. I want answers. Why is the HOA suddenly so interested in my lawn, my trellis, my existence?" Gary fidgeted with his pen. "It's not personal. We're just enforcing the rules." I leaned forward. "Right. So those rules include trashing my yard and spreading lies about me? Because if that's in the handbook, I must have missed it." Gary tried to backpedal, but it was clear he had no real control over the situation. The HOA wasn't a well-oiled machine. It was a pack of wolves, each one trying to outdo the other. And guess who they decided to gang up on? Yours truly. When I left the office, I noticed something odd. A black SUV was parked across the street, its tinted windows gleaming in the sunlight. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it. Lately, it seemed to be everywhere I went, just far enough away to be inconspicuous, but close enough to feel intentional. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, things escalated. Around midnight, Max started barking like crazy. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, half expecting to find some drunk teenager egging my house. Instead, I saw shadows moving near my backyard fence. "Hey!" I shouted, shining the flashlight. The figures froze for a second, then bolted. I didn't get a good look, but I knew it wasn't random. Someone was testing me, trying to see how far they could push before I snapped. And let me tell you, I was close, real close. As I sat in my kitchen, sipping a stiff drink and trying to calm my nerves, one thought kept running through my head. Who the hell are these people, and why are they so desperate to get rid of me? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. They'd messed with the wrong guy. The next morning, I woke up determined. If these people wanted to push me out of my own home, they were going to have to try a hell of a lot harder. And trust me, I don't back down, ever. First things first, I installed more security cameras around my property. Not just your basic front door cams, but the high-end stuff, night vision, motion sensors, you name it. I figured if these clowns wanted to keep playing games, I'd have front row seats to their stupidity. And boy, did they deliver. Later that day, while reviewing last night's footage, I spotted something that nearly made me choke on my coffee. It wasn't just shadows this time. No, I had clear video of Mrs. Carter herself sneaking around my backyard like some geriatric ninja. She was carrying a can of spray paint and a piece of paper. I paused the footage, zoomed in, and there it was. My fence, freshly tagged with the words, "You don't belong here." The audacity. This woman, who probably couldn't figure out how to use a smartphone without calling her grandkids for help, had decided to launch a full-blown graffiti campaign against me. I couldn't help but laugh, partly because it was pathetic, but mostly because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. That afternoon, I strolled over to Mrs. Carter's house, phone in hand. She opened the door, her face immediately twisting into that fake smile she reserved for people she thought were beneath her. "Mr. Malcolm," she said, tilting her head like she was about to lecture me. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I held up my phone, the video playing on a loop. Her smile vanished faster than a plate of cookies at a bake sale. "Recognize yourself?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've got some impressive moves for someone your age. Ever consider auditioning for one of those crime dramas?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "But the police might feel differently. I'm sure they'd love to hear why the president of the HOA is vandalizing a neighbor's property." Her face turned beet red. "You wouldn't dare." I leaned in closer. "Oh, Mrs. Carter, you don't know me at all. I don't just dare. I thrive on it." That night, I decided to take things a step further. I didn't just want to expose her. I wanted to send a message to the entire HOA. So I printed stills from the video and slipped them into every mailbox on the block. Along with the images, I included a note that read, "Is this what your HOA dues are paying for?" The fallout was glorious. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People were whispering on their porches, pointing fingers, and generally losing their minds. Mrs. Carter's reputation as the self-righteous queen of the HOA was crumbling faster than a poorly built sandcastle. But I wasn't done yet. While all of this was happening, that black SUV I'd noticed earlier showed up again. This time it was parked right in front of my house. I walked out onto the porch, staring it down like it was some wild animal trying to encroach on my territory. "Can I help you?" I called out, hands on my hips. The window rolled down just enough for me to see a man in a suit. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nod that felt more like a warning than a greeting. Then he drove off. Now, I'm not a paranoid guy, okay, maybe a little, but something about that car didn't sit right with me. And if I'm being honest, it pissed me off. Whoever these people were, they clearly thought they could intimidate me. Big mistake. That evening I sat in my living room staring at the walls covered in photos, notes, and diagrams. It looked like a scene out of a detective movie, and for good reason. I was putting together the pieces of this puzzle. Who was watching me? Why was the HOA so desperate to get rid of me? And what the hell was the real story behind this seemingly perfect neighborhood? One thing was certain, I wasn't dealing with just nosy neighbors. This went deeper, a lot deeper, and they were about to find out just how dangerous it is to mess with the wrong guy. By now it was clear this wasn't just a neighborhood feud. This was something bigger, nastier, and way more organized than Mrs. Carter and her clipboard brigade. Whoever was behind that black SUV, they weren't just casually curious about my trellis. No, they were watching me, and it was time I let them know the game was about to change. That morning I suited up. Not literally. I wasn't putting on a tux or anything, but mentally I was in full combat mode. I spent the day tying up loose ends, updating my security setup, locking down my financials, and making a few very pointed phone calls to people who owed me favors. Old friends, the kind of friends who don't ask questions but get shit done. By evening, the pieces were in place. I had everything I needed, evidence of vandalism, threats, surveillance, and then, of course, there was the pièce de résistance, the HOA's financial records. Oh yeah, I'd gotten my hands on those too. Turns out, Mrs. Carter and her cronies had been skimming funds for years. Who knew enforcing lawn height regulations could be so lucrative? I waited until the HOA's next monthly meeting to make my move. They held it at the local community center, a bland, little building that smelled like coffee and bad decisions. When I walked in, every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. "Mr. Malcolm," Mrs. Carter said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "This is a private meeting." "Don't worry," I said, flashing my best "I'm about to destroy you" grin. "I'm not staying long." I walked to the front of the room and pulled out my laptop, connecting it to the projector. But since I'm here, I thought I'd share a little presentation. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her face turning pale. "Oh, you'll see," I said, clicking the first slide. Up popped a video of Mrs. Carter sneaking into my yard, spray paint in hand. The room erupted in murmurs. Someone in the back actually gasped. "Let's call this Exhibit A," I said, my tone casual. But wait, there's more." I clicked to the next slide. Screenshots of their financial records highlighting the discrepancies. Exhibit B. Seems like our beloved HOA president has been a little creative with the budget. New landscaping for the community, or was that just for your backyard, Mrs. Carter? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The murmurs turned into full-blown accusations. "Is this true? What the hell is going on?" The room was chaos. "And finally," I said, raising my voice to cut through the noise, "let's not forget the little matter of harassment and intimidation. You all thought it was fun and games to mess with me, but let me make one thing clear. I'm not just some guy you can bully out of his home." I stepped forward, locking eyes with Mrs. Carter. "You wanted to know who I am? Fine. I'm Malcolm, former FBI special agent, and I've taken down bigger fish than you." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mrs. Carter tried to backpedal, sputtering excuses about misunderstandings and errors in judgment, but it was too late. The board members turned on her faster than a pack of hyenas. By the time I walked out, the police had already been called to review the situation, and Mrs. Carter's little empire was crumbling around her. As for the black SUV, that mystery didn't last much longer. A day after the meeting, a man in a dark suit showed up at my door. He wasn't smug this time. If anything, he looked nervous. "We weren't aware of your background," he said, carefully choosing his words. "Had we known—" "Save it," I cut him off. If I see that SUV near my house again, I'll assume you're here for a hostile takeover, and trust me, you don't want to see what I do in those situations." He nodded, muttered something about miscommunication, and left. I haven't seen him, or the SUV, since. Now my neighborhood is a lot quieter. Mrs. Carter resigned from the HOA, and a new board was elected. They leave me alone now, which is exactly how I like it. Max and I sit on the porch most evenings, enjoying the peace I fought damn hard to keep. And the trellis? Oh, it's still standing. It's not just a piece of iron. It's a monument to the fact that nobody, and I mean nobody, messes with Malcolm.